Hello there, everybody from Cork, from Derry, from Kildare, from Wicklow, from all around the country. How are you getting on today? Are you well? Thanks very much for joining us for the big debate here with Aim to tonight. Um, there's a very, very busy political week in many ways around the country. A very important week for many families around the country as well, and major change is happening too. So I suppose what we'll do is we'll try to get to the main issues as soon as we can. Just I suppose in the north, the political agenda has been filled with the experience of the Ballymurphy family and the families across the area, the estates of Ballymurphy in Belfast. And many of you will know that 50 years ago, over a couple of days, the British paratroopers shot dead 10 people in one of the most shocking incidents of state violence that the North had ever seen. And incredibly sad situations where, nationalists, Catholics with no political involvement, with no involvement in any organizations, were gunned down by the forces of the state that were meant to protect them. And I know one situation, and I'm always a little bit cautious about even going through these situations because some of them are so sad and I imagine so raw still for some of the families who are related to the loved ones that were lost. But there's a case of Joan Conley that always sticks in my mind. Joan was a young mother of a big family in Ballymurphy, and on the day in which the paratroopers were in and involved in their violence, Joan was looking for her daughter. And while looking for her daughter, she had to hide behind the gable end of a house. And she noticed a young man who was shot by the British Army, and he lay dying. And she went to his aid to assist him, to secretly help him. And she believed that the British Army wouldn't shoot her as she was helping an injured individual, and because she was a woman. But she was wrong because she was shot. And the gunshot removed a significant section of her face and knocked her down. And she lay dying for 6 hours. Nobody could go to her assistance because paratroopers were sniping individuals who were looking to help. We also know the parish priest of Ballymurphy who phoned the police station to say that he was going in to help, was holding a white flag, and he himself was shot. So a shocking situation for people who were murdered by the state. But not only that, their names were defamed. So right after that happened, the British military establishment did a job on their good names and tried to associate them or accuse those individuals of being, gunmen or being violent themselves, and try to muddy the waters for years and years and years. And finally, obviously this week, 50 years later, 50 years, it's just hard to believe that it took 50 years for a state organization in the north of Ireland to recognize what everybody else knew, that these individuals were fully innocent. And it's heartbreaking that they had to wait for so long, but there is enormous celebration amongst the Ballymurphy families this week as a result of that great news, that their names have been vindicated. Now, I will say this, I've raised their cases a large number of times in the Dáil and in the southern media and in the political establishment in the south. And I've always been shocked that a lot of the political establishments in the south knew little or nothing about the Ballymurphy families. And it struck me that even in death, after being defamed, that many of these individuals were discriminated, that there was a hierarchy of victims in the north, that in the south, if there wasn't political capital in it for Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, they wouldn't pay the necessary attention to families who lost loved ones. So shockingly, on the same day that the family got the good news, the English Queen in the House of Commons made a statement indicating that it's likely now that the Tories are going to prevent people seeking justice through the courts for killings by the British state in the north of Ireland. before the Good Friday Agreement. So while the Ballymurphy families have had the truth, and we welcome that, they should have the right to seek justice too, if that's what they want through the courts. And we in Aim 2 will be fighting hard to make sure that is the case. So our solidarity and our thoughts and our warm wishes go to the families of those who were lost in Ballymurphy 50 years ago. Another issue that I want to update you before we get on to the housing issue, because I know the housing issue is the main key element of this, is that Aim 2, along with other TDs in Leinster House, brought about a new bill which passed first stage yesterday. And that bill seeks that pain relief would be given to an unborn child in a late-term abortion in Ireland. Now, shockingly, we brought forward an amendment to the bill when it went through the abortion legislation in 2018. And Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, the Soc Dems, People for Profit voted against it. Now, I can't understand how any politician, any political activist could vote against the idea of mandating in law that pain relief would be given to a child after 20 weeks gestation, when they can feel pain. In Britain, when in utero operations are carried out on children in the womb, the guidelines state that they have to use pain relief. In Ireland, if you carry out an operation on an animal, primary legislation states that you have to use pain relief. Yet in Ireland, the Fianna Fáil minister, the Fine Gael minister, Sinn Féin, and the other political parties so far have refused to make sure that the legislation has clearly stated that the child should receive pain relief. And we in Aim 2 are delighted to be part of this bill, and we hope that it gets through second stage as soon as possible. So just wanted to bring that to your attention as well. And well done to all the other TDs, independent TDs, and I think Eamon O'Keefe as well from Fianna Fáil, who had the backbone to sign something which just should be basic when it comes to humanity and common decency and compassion, which is sorely missing currently from the political establishment. Just very quickly, I want to touch, if I can, on the issue of COVID. It's good news this week in relation to COVID. Thankfully, at long last, Fiera here Hall, Maradern, we had a situation where some of the COVID restrictions were relaxed, and people got to go to church services for the first time in months, where some people have been able to open shops and through appointments, and some personal services have been opened. And I know all my kids have moved from the 70s in hairstyles to the teens, and very, very quickly. So it is good news in that. But I just want to say that the government's pace of opening is very, very slow at the moment. It is shockingly slow. And there's a couple of things I just want to touch on. Yesterday, it was announced to us through RTE and the rest of the media that 8 people had died due to COVID. But when you dig back a little bit deeper into that, you realize that all of those deaths happened before March this year. And our deepest sympathies obviously go to those families who lost loved ones. But I am seriously concerned with the way they're actually reporting these deaths at the moment. It does not make sense, because people have the understanding that these deaths are happening concurrently, that people are losing their lives in these numbers every day, and they're not. And what it does is it gives people a false impression of the actual risk that exists in the state. And thankfully, we have hospital admissions down nearly to 100, and we have ICU admissions down nearly to 30. They are extremely low numbers. And to be honest, they don't warrant the level of restrictions that are still in place. Think about this as well. When we in Aim 2 were founded just 2.5 years ago nearly, one of our key objectives was to puncture the groupthink that exists in this country. And, groupthink doesn't just disappear after an issue is dealt with. It keeps reappearing in this country. The emperor has, no clothes, keeps reappearing in this country. And think about it, that, all of the opposition political parties, except for Aim 2, simply either agreed with the government or actually were going to a more extreme position than the government on COVID. Sinn Féin sat on the fence. We had the Soc Dems, the Labour Party, Solidarity, People Before Profit, all going further, all looking for zero COVID. And the logic of that was that nothing would have reopened until cases were down to about a 10 or less a day. And like, I don't think we're ever going to get down to 10 or less COVID cases a day. And we're certainly not going to achieve that in the next 6 months. So, if we were to listen to the so-called opposition political parties, the parties that agree with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael on the right, on taking away the right to life, these are also the people who are going down the direction of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in relation to COVID. Like, it's just mind-boggling. The political establishment, opposition, and government are in lockstep with each other on so many issues in the Dáil. And I think a lot of people are opening up to the realization that Aontú is a breath of fresh air. It's critical thinking, independent thinking, common sense, logical politics that we're trying to do at the moment. And just, we have called for a public investigation in the way that the government have handled the COVID crisis to date. And the reason why a public investigation is so important is because, and we found out this information, you have a situation now whereby over half of the deaths that happened as a result of COVID in the last 14 months happened in 2 locations. They happened in nursing homes, where 2,000 people lost their lives, and they happened in hospitals, where 750 people lost their lives. Think about that. The government's locked down all of society for most of the last 14 months, and yet most of the deaths actually happened in 2 locations in which the government was responsible for, either through running those locations or in the regulation of those locations. Where is the logic? They were responsible for where most of the people died, and yet they put all the responsibility on the rest of society to protect life. Very, very serious questions to answer in relation to that. And I believe that the government has questions to answer in relation to nursing homes. The nursing homes closed their doors at the start of the pandemic, and then all of a sudden, the government said, no, open them up, and they opened them up for a few weeks, and then they shut them down very quickly. They also sent, asymptomatic close contact staff back into the hospital service. They also took people with COVID, put them into nursing homes, and didn't test them properly. They also allowed nursing homes and hospitals to function under phenomenal pressure, where staff were busted, where there was clearly cases of staff being swamped. I know one nursing home that had 3 staff that worked at a 48-hour shift trying to hold it together. At the same time, 74,000 people signed up for Be On Call for Ireland. And of that 4,000 people, the government decided to employ. In my own county, between Meath and Louth, well over 4,500 people signed up to Be On Call for Ireland so that they could help frontline workers in this crisis. 4 of them were employed out of that number. Absolutely startling figures. So serious questions to be answered. Now, I bet your bottom dollar that the political establishment, both media and politics, will try to water down any need for an investigation into what's happened. We need to investigate to why Ireland was an outlier in terms of the length of time and the severity of our lockdown, because as a result of that, 40 billion euros will be added onto our debt. Debt which basically is stealing investment from housing, healthcare, education, and infrastructure from the future. If we have lamped up all of this debt just over the last 14 months, it means we won't have the money to pay for these issues in the future, because we'll have to pay that debt off and the interest as well. We are the only political party that has stated that pubs and restaurants and hotels should open on the same day in the start of June. Under the government's proposal, and it's so nuts that it would make you laugh. It is safer, they say, to have a pint or a meal inside in a hotel than in a pub or a restaurant. So hotels will allow for indoor dining on the 2nd of November, the 2nd of June. And then a full week after that, pubs and restaurants will be able to open outside only. No date has been given to them to open inside. Now, can someone tell me the science behind allowing for indoor dining in a hotel and not allowing for it in a restaurant. Surely the same signs should be followed in restaurants, hotels, and pubs. The same regulations with regards to capacity, numbers, and social distancing should be implemented in all three locations. If you're going to close pubs and restaurants, some of them that have, especially the pubs, been closed for 400 days, and if you're going to close them until mid-July, you're basically means that the half of the tourist summer season is closed to them. And I don't believe that the numbers in hospitals, ICU, and admissions are high enough to warrant those being closed for any longer than the start of June. And then just one final point on this. The convention centre in Leinster House is costing 25 grand a day to run. 25,000 euros. Now, in my county of Meath, we found out this week that a special school will have its funding for hot dinners withdrawn from them. Juxtaposed the political establishment and its largesse at 25 grand a day to children with special needs in a school, some of them traveling large distances on buses, spending, being away from their house from 7 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the evening and not having a warm meal in front of that. What kind of political system allows for that? It's absolutely incredible. Okay, listen, I want to get onto the issue of housing, because that housing has come back into the political space just over the last week. In reality, for people, it had never gone, but the political class had forgotten about it for the last 14 months. And I laugh, that Micheál Martin, Mary Lou McDonald, all the political establishment leaders saying that housing is the number one issue currently in this country. But if housing was the number one issue in the country, we wouldn't have had a country that literally closed down every single building site for the last 4 months. Most of Europe managed to allow for homes to be built during the worst periods of this pandemic. And yet in this state, houses were closed down, or house building was closed down. So it's estimated that 10,000 houses weren't built at the start of this year due to the political class, all of them agreeing with closing them down. Now, 10,000 is an interesting number because it roughly equates to the same number of people who are homeless in this country. And don't tell me that housing isn't a life and death issue, because 79 people died on the streets of Dublin alone in homelessness last year. This year, so far, 38 people have lost their lives due to homelessness just in Dublin, not in any other county. And the reason why I can't give you the numbers in any other county is because the government don't collect numbers of people who die in homelessness in any other county, which is in itself an absolute scandal. So we have a political class that's woken up to the crisis of housing again. And it seems to me that some of them might see political energy in it, because if they were real on this issue, they wouldn't have supported the full closure of all homes being built for the last month. Now, there's something really strange happening in Irish society. It's funny, I often feel because of the gloss of the marketing of the modern political parties, there is this sense that this generation is the most progressive generation, is the best off generation, is a generation that has achieved the most and has been, reached its potential the most. But ask yourself, is that really true? Because 2 generations ago, for example, most families in this country would have been able to either buy a house or definitely get a house through local authority or rent. It would be very unusual 2 generations ago for a normal average family income to not be able to purchase a home. The cost of home was typically about 2.5, 3, maybe 4 times the average wage about 2 generations ago. And remember, the average wage was based upon a single income typically 2 generations ago. So now we have 2 people working, bursting themselves, trying to earn enough money. And yet those 2 incomes added together are still preventing people buying houses in most of the counties in this country. It's an incredible thing. So this is probably the first generation in dozens of generations that is actually significantly worse off than the previous generation. So we're not seeing progress. We're seeing actual regression in the well-being and wealth of this generation, the younger people of this country at the moment. Like home ownership, mortgage repayments, rent, the commuter crisis, the cost of childcare, the cost of living, salary stagnation, economic instability. These are massive challenges that are actually being suffered significantly more at the age profiles between 20 and 45 years of age. And the government are not waking up to that issue. Right now, we have 25% unemployment, 60% youth unemployment. And I have no doubt that when foreign travel does open up, many of those people will go out of the country, shockingly, like so many other generations went before. And there's a serious problem with the housing crisis, and it hasn't happened by accident. And don't worry, I am going to get to the solutions to this, because Aintu is a solutions-based political movement, and it's really important to us. But I just want to focus on a couple of key issues as to the causes of this. Now, one of I've been involved in politics for 25 years. I'm an elected rep for about 13 years. It takes a lot to actually shock me, to amaze me when it comes to the hard neck and the cynicism within politics. But this week, you had a choir of shock amongst the establishment parties that international investment companies were hoovering up homes. Now, I was dumbfounded in Leinster House, even looking at the Labour Party castigates Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael with regards to these policies. Let's remember what happened here. After the crash, Fine Gael rolled out with the Labour Party a red carpet to international investors and vulture funds. So they did that to put a floor under the price of the housing market, and they did that to improve the balance sheets of the banks, because if the assets and the liabilities of the banks were equalized through higher house prices, it would improve their viability into the future. So they introduced the laws that gave interest rates and taxation advantages to international investors and vulture funds. They cut back capital gains tax. They cut back stamp duty. They even cut back on corporation tax for many of these international investment funds. Some of these guys were making hundreds of millions of euros and paying less than your average person on an average industrial wage in taxation. So they rolled out that red carpet. They invited these organizations into the party, and they knew exactly what happened. It laughs because I've studied economics, obviously, and I look at Fine Gael, and Fine Gael pride themselves as the party of free market economics. And they radically distorted the market with all of these competitive advantages to these big international investment companies. So what's happening on a daily basis is a David and Goliath battle between international investment firms who not only are getting tax advantages, but are getting interest rates in the international market at 0%, way lower than your young couple starting out looking to buy a house. They're competing, with all these competitive advantages against young families trying to get their foot on the property ladder. There's no chance that young families can beat them when the playing field is so tilted in favor of these international companies. So the first logical thing you do is you make sure that you take these competitive advantages away from them. So that's why we in Aintu are currently looking at a bill to repeal the taxation competitive advantages that these REITs and international investment funds have in the international market and in the Irish market. So we're hoping that we can bring this bill before the Dáil, hopefully in the next 10 days, which will undercut the ability for the REITs to hammer Irish families in competition for these houses. Because if they don't do that, what they're literally going to do is create a tenant class amongst Irish people, the likes that haven't been seen since landlord times. Literally tenant class, where you're going to see a shift of wealth from families paying 2,000, 2,500 euros rents on a monthly basis to these big international firms. And that is the opposite to what should be happening. So that's one of the first solutions that we want to look at. There's another element in this that's not being spoken about by the political class as of yet, and that's the exposure to the Irish property markets to another economic shock. So today we're talking in the Dáil today about personal insolvency. And we are in a housing crisis at the moment, yet in the courts in this country, the collateral damage of the last housing crisis, those who were made insolvent because of the crash then, are still winding their way through those courts, which is incredibly shocking. We had a massive economic and credit shock back 10 years ago. That's not going to happen in the same way in the future because the banks aren't as extended currently as they were before. But these international investment firms that are pouring all this money into the Irish property market at the moment, they're in here because of a number of different economic factors. Prime among those is the international interest rates. When those interest rates change, their business model will change, and I bet you some of these guys will look to leave. And if they do, at speed, all at once, they could have a serious impact on the property market in this country. So we could be exposed to further economic instability due to the policies of this government. Social housing was the solution to the housing crisis in the 1930s, in the 1950s, and in the 1980s. When Ireland was economically stuffed, this country was able to build social houses to make up for when private houses weren't being built. And that's the major area that the government needs to focus in at the moment. They have never attained their objective of building enough social houses. Last year in 2020, only 20,000 houses were built. That's information we just got back from a PQ today. And the government have never gone near the targets that they've set themselves for social houses. And we need to do that. And that's why in the last budget, we in AIM2 looked for an additional investment of €2.2 billion capital spending to make sure that those 10,000 housing units could be built on an annual basis. It needs to happen. Secondly, we need to end the speculation within the market. It cannot be profitable for a developer or a REIT or an international investor to sit on property, be it vacant land or units, to see the prices go up. We need to make sure that especially vacant land is taxed if there's speculative reasons for people to sit on it and not use it. We need to make sure that all vacant land is brought into use as soon as it can. There is a vacant site register at the moment, and there is a small tax paid on some of those, but it's minuscule, and not all those blocks of land are on that site register. Another issue that we in AIM want to do is 1 in 33 houses currently in the States are vacant. In Meath, there's about 3,500 houses, or 3,500 people on the housing waiting list, and there's 2,500 homes that are empty. Now, the fact that we can't get it together to, home people in vacant houses is a serious lack of ability by the government. So there's three things need to happen with vacant homes. First of all, if people are sitting on vacant homes and again not bringing them into use, there needs to be a stick, a tax to bring those into use. There also needs to be a carrot, because some people don't have the money to bring them into use. So we need to be able to put grants available to those people so that they can get that money and start to do up homes to bring them into use so that they can be rented out to families. That's really, really important to get that going. And secondly, if none of that works, local authorities should be empowered to CPO, to compulsory purchase order derelict buildings that are actually, centers of antisocial behavior and drug use, to CPO those buildings, get them back into use as well. And that's what we need to want to see. And we know that local authorities that have started to CPO, even threaten CPO, have actually scared people into start getting those buildings back into use and back into people's homes. We need to end the eternal regulation that is happening at the moment when it comes to house building. So every year you have Alan Kelly brings out one regulation, and then O'Murphy brings about another regulation, then Darragh Bryan brings about another regulation, and developers are going to themselves, well, actually, if we hold on and don't build for a while, the regulations will improve, we can get more units into the site, and we'll make more profit. So after a while, there's a hesitancy for developers to bother developing. They'll wait for higher profit futures. So we need to stop that eternal change in regulation of homes as well. We need to improve tenants' rights, and we need to make sure that tenants have longer leases, that they have security, a fixture of tenor, so that they can be confident that they're not going to get pegged out of their homes. We need to actually put a proper ceiling on rents at the moment, link it to the cost of inflation for an emergency period of time, so that we don't see these rents continuously increasing. We need to also make sure that builders have finance. One of the excuses that the government gave for inviting in the REITs, the vulture funds, and these big investment firms is they say, well, nobody can finance these particular projects at the moment. Well, if nobody can finance these particular projects at the moment, fix it. Now, the reason they can't do it is because the banking system is in crisis also. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, and sometimes it feels like that, but we have two banks. It's called an oligopoly. They own most of the market. They can literally determine anything they want within the market because people have no choice of where to go. What small other competitors they have are leaving the market. Ulster Bank is leaving the market. KBC is leaving the market. So we need to reform that. We need to make it more attractive for other private banks to come in. But we also need, if we can, to create a public banking system. That's why we in Ain2, along with other TDs, this week took the initiative of asking each committee in Leinster House to pass a motion which calls on the government to create a banking forum where all the stakeholders of banking are involved in, where small businesses, farmers, rural Ireland, trade unions can all come together and work out how do we increase the competition and health of the banking market. And one of the ways that we want that to happen is through the creation of an additional public banking system. And this happens in the likes of Germany and other countries in Europe, and it would offer another opportunity for finance to be made available for people to be able to build homes into the future. So there's just a couple of the solutions that we in Ain2 have been working on when it comes to housing. If you ask me, there's a lethargy in the establishment political parties. There's a lack of economic know-how, I'll be honest with you, in the establishment political parties. One of the main problems is that a lot of the opposition parties are very good on social housing bills, but really poor on reforming the dysfunction within the private housing sector. We're not going to fix this with one side of this equation alone. We need both sides of the equation to function. And it seems to me that only Ain2 are looking at both sides of that equation. So listen, that's just a quick summary on the housing sector. I'll just want to raise another couple of small issues, if I can, with regards to what's happening in the country. I'm very proud that we have a new exciting bill being introduced into the Dáil on Wednesday. This bill is an important bill. It's, as you know, obviously there's been an election in Scotland just recently where those in favour of independence won the election, and there's likely to be a referendum in Scotland shortly on independence. And that debate on Irish independence and Irish unity is happening here right across the 32 counties of Ireland. And indeed, there's a growing majority in favour of it and a growing desire to see literally just Irish self-determination, Irish people making decisions about our own future together. The bill that Ain2 are introducing into Leinster House on Wednesday is called the All-Ireland Representation Bill. And this bill, if passed, will allow for elected MPs in the north of Ireland to be able to sit in the Dáil, to represent communities around the country, right across the 6 counties, to be able to ask questions of ministers and to be able to speak on behalf of people in the north of Ireland. Ain2, wants to see the day when we have Ain2 TDs from West Tyrone, from West Belfast, from Foyle, and from South Armagh joining us in Leinster House in a truly democratic All-Ireland Dáil, the one that was envisaged in the 1916 proclamation and that was fought for in the War of Independence just 100 years ago. And we wanted to see that in fruition in the next while. Now, under our bill, it doesn't allow for votes for MPs from the north as of yet. And we just simply didn't add that because we know that the political establishment will do their best to prevent that. They would say, well, if there's no taxation, they shouldn't have the ability to vote on bills, etc. And also, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, them being only regional political parties and not national parties like ourselves, only located in one part of Ireland and not all of Ireland, they would be frightened to have a situation like that happen. We're also pushing for representatives in the north of Ireland who are elected to be able to take their place on the committees in Leinster House. There's actually no law preventing that at the moment, yet no other political party but Aon has actually been pushing for that, and we've written for the Ceann Comhairle to allow for the standing orders for the committees to be changed to facilitate that to happen. So that's good news in relation to that. Also, just to let you know that we're going to have our selection conventions in the north of Ireland for the upcoming Stormont elections. The Stormont elections will be happening in a year's time, and we will be competing in that election to win MLA seats. It's really important for our development in the north of Ireland that we have MLAs sitting in Stormont who are able to represent our core values. It is also important with regards, issues such as the right to life, such as Irish unity, such as economic justice, and such as standing up for our values, that we have that voice in Stormont. So we'll be having those selection conventions in the north very, very soon. There's also a by-election happening in Dublin Bay South, which will happen before November, and we will be selecting a candidate to fight in that election. We will be the only political party fighting in that by-election who will have stood up to the political establishment in relation to the heavy-handed over-reliance on very severe lockdowns. And don't get me wrong, we realized COVID is a real issue, and we needed to protect people's lives. We needed to protect the health service. But when the health service wasn't in danger of being swamped, the government needed to use other tools to protect people's lives, and it simply didn't. It only had one tool in its toolbox during this whole process, which was wrong. So we'll be the only political party involved in that by-election with that particular view. And in many ways, this will be a referendum on the government's handling of the last year and a half. We will have a meeting for members and supporters of anybody in Dublin South who wants to get involved in that campaign. That meeting will be at 11 a.m. on Zoom on Saturday morning. So if any of you are from that area, let your friends and family know about it. Contact me and I'll send you the link for that Zoom meeting on Saturday morning. And just the second last issue, just if I can, we have a draw in County Meath at the moment to raise funds. We're hoping to open up an office in Kells in the Meath East constituency to offer a constituency service to people there and to win elections in that constituency. So people, if they want to buy a ticket for that, they can go on to the Aon2 website and purchase a ticket from the shop for that. And last but not least, what I would like to do, if I can, is I want to thank all the Aon2 members and supporters throughout Ireland. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. To the people who are listening here, there is a phenomenal heroism in the membership of the Aon2 political movements. A group of people who have grown from a small organization just 2.5 years ago, who have stood up for what they believed in, who are able to think for themselves, who left the groupthink behind, who have a common sense attitude towards Ireland's future, and who see political activism as the key to unlock the potential of Ireland's future. We have 1,000 members across the country at the moment. We've selected 46 local area representatives, people of good character who are standing in their local areas, immersed in their local communities, building their profile and the profile of Aon2. We have 60 functioning Cumann throughout the country, people getting together, discussing local politics, national politics, working on campaigns to improve the lives of people in their areas. If you're listening to this particular debate here tonight, if your values are our values, I'm asking you, don't hold back, get off the fence. This is the time we need your help. Simply click on the Aon2 website to the membership level page there and sign on the bottom line, because the stronger we are, the more likely your objectives will be achieved. Listen, Sinead Lahai an Iha Nucht, Mila Buekas as vet Lina Nucht kun an Spoilach Sho a Vehagwin, Togalor Ruddy Titmamach, Hartimpel Natira, Marialer and Tushkirts, is Shafton Intach Esho, Lahai Klan Balya Iwaraku email first, Agus Lacuna Day. By sheets in an on, Cart agus core of Wintermach Satoki, near a toss sheets, creating leis an seachtain seo. Tá go leordaí ag dit amach fós tá chlán faoi bhrú sa tír seo fós mar gheall ar na sréntaí COVID tá fós I mun sa tír seo. Agus cáimid oscail suas I bhfad níos tapúla. Agus is muidena in 1 an 1040 ag tá ag bhrú an dur sé oscail mar gheall ar sin. Mar gheall ar cuasaí taíochta. Is féidir linn an 5 seo a réiti. Ach ní féidir linn a réiti má thuganmid na buntáistí iomlán go léir don na cólachtaí idirnáisiúnta atá ag ceannach suas na tithe go léir. Caithfidh go mbeidh comhanas agus deisina ag chlán teachar ceannach le haghaidh cuid fáistí sa tír seo. Agus mar gheall ar an cruinniú I baile átha clia heas ar an saithreann, tá sima go sa páirte ghlacha sa cruinniú sin chur scaart orm sa seolaí mise an seola Zoom cuasa agus baimiidir an agrú sa dá ceantar sin freisin. Míle buchas as an cabhar, mar dúirt mé hama, má tartú ag iarraidh mar buil, simply brú ar an suíomhidirlín, aon2.ie, brú ar an leathanach bailríocht agus chuir d'anam síos agus bílinn. Ihuaith agus slán go fóill.